Do you know the word that was coined in 1966 that means 125th anniversary?
I know it. Can I pronounce it? I've yet to pronounce it correctly.
Ooh,
I'll give it a try. Quasquincentenial?
This word?
Quasquincentenial?
That's so long word.
I know it is.
I've heard it many times.
Well, I saw a peek at your sign, and it must be Quasquincentenial.
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 The word Quasquincentenial?
Quasquincentenial.
Quasquincentenial.
Quadquiscentennial?
Good. Okay, how about you, Claire?
Quasquincentenial.
It is Quasquincentenial.
Quasquincentenial, the 125th anniversary of the Verne Church of the Brethren.
Well, my first memory of the Verne Church of the Brethren is seeing my picture on the wall in the cradle roll of the old church. But I was a sophomore in high school when I saw that.
My first memory of the Verne Church of the Brethren is as a child, as an elementary student at Roynan, who I sang, and my first memories of the Church of the Brethren are going to the Church of the Brethren, walking from school on a mini field trip to go to the Church of the Brethren and perform.
I remember a little tiny church, little wooden church that we put our offering in. I remember that specifically.
What's your first memory about being at this church?
Probably after service I used to come, and when Travi was the organist. And we'd come here, and I was probably no more than 4 or 5 years old, and I would, as soon as the service was over, I'd always run up and sit next to him while he finished up the organ. I always thought that was really cool.
That is
I always
cool.
thought I was real special to be able to do that.
Riley Evans pulling me up the stairs to go into church. My first time coming, I was like 4. She was forcing me to go into church.
It was brand new. I'd never been to the church before, and I came here to memorial service, and I loved the kids running up front to the children's time. It showed me how open we were, and I loved it.
My first memories of attending the church were when I was in college and going to chapel on Tuesday mornings.
My first memory of the Church of the Brethren is just pulling up and seeing a church like I'd never seen any Brethren church before. I was kind of amazed.
My first memory of the Verne Church of the Brethren was my baccalaureate graduation or baccalaureate ceremony from the University of Laverne in 1988. I had seen the church before, but I think that had been my first time actually entering the doors.
Well, my first memory really is the story that my parents told me. I was born on a Sunday. My father stood at the pulpit. He was the minister of this church. And he said, I have a confession to make. I have fallen in love with another woman. She has blue eyes and brown hair. And the congregation kind of gasped. And he said, and her name is Mary Catherine Ogden. She was born this morning at 4:30 a.m. And then there was kind of a sigh.
I came to the University of Laverne as a freshman, and I walked over and came to church here. And I loved the courtyard. I met Leona Eikenberry, friendliest, most wonderful staff person, and I felt welcomed. And the inside of the building was like no other Church of the Brethren I'd ever seen before. It was massive and had symbols and stained glass windows. It was just gorgeous.
I give a lot of credit to Annie Hennewalt, who was a wife of Harvey, because she was very artistic.
She went to Laverne College. She went to an academy.
Lordsburg Academy.
Yeah.
Did you know Annie Hannibal?
Yes, I did. She was an old woman when I was a child, and I would go visit her house. And she had lovely things, and she had beautiful flower arrangements that she would do for the church and for her home. And she had a lovely courtyard, and she was very welcoming.
Harvey's wife was instrumental in the beauty in the church that we have today. I don't think it would ever happen without her and without her husband, who was willing to follow her leadership in how it's decorated and all of that. I think it's just amazing that Laverne built that sanctuary in 1930.
Well, I can remember when the first church was built right here, and I remember going to the cradle roll. Not really, but we had pictures of everybody that was in the cradle roll. Oh. So you had a wall, and Mrs. Miller, who the Miller school is named after.
Oh yeah, Grace Miller.
Grace Miller, and she was the teacher and all. And then I remember we had buildings over here going to Sunday school there, and then I remember going up in the tower. We had a Sunday school room up there. And so been really coming here since I was born.
Do you know how many fireplaces there are at church? 4. There's one in the fireside room, one in the patio, one in the social hall, and one in the scout building.
Where's that?
Well, that's down in the basement below the stage.
Where the youth get together. Youth group room.
In the fellowship hall.
And our father made all those.
How old are you, Emma?
I'm 9.
How old do you think the church is?
Like 1,000 years.
1,000 years old?
It's a church of love, a church of yes, a church where you're going to be welcome. You can wear jeans and sandals and flip-flops or a fancy hat, and everyone's going to love you and accept you.
I also have a bumper sticker on there from the Church of the Brethren, which is the sticker that says something along the lines like, when Jesus said, love your enemy, I think he meant don't kill them. And I had a guy pull up to me the other day, and he decided to flash one of his really special fingers at me. Now I don't know which one of my stickers set him off. I highly doubt it was the one that said, the more men I meet, the more I like my cats. But, you know, my first assumption is that somehow I'm this tree hugger that wants to live in a fantasy world where I think that someday there will be world peace. And I just smiled at him.
Somebody threw a beer bottle through your grandfather's big bay window during that time.
Uncle Jesse?
Well, he made it known what his stand was, and said where he would be at home. I was reading this just recently, and they came and they took him away with his hands tied and, you know, put him, he was at Alcatraz for a day, I think, and then they took him, and he was there for the whole time of the war. Was my understanding. So that was World War I.
Okay, my life in peace. Well, I was a conscientious objector during World War II, and the lead up to going into camp, there weren't too many situations where anybody made any big issue out of it. Laverne did have issues, though. I can remember people got rocks thrown through their window and things of that sort.
A church that isn't willing to accept everybody isn't a church at all. Was what I put on this poster, and I stood outside of one of those entrances where a lot of people were going to meeting, and I just stood there and held it, and I wasn't one bit embarrassed. I meant what the sign said. I agreed with it 100%, and I wanted people to see it. And nobody spit on me or yelled at me or anything. They just let me stand there. And that was my one moment of protest in the whole thing.
When my oldest child decided not to register with selective service, I was really proud of him and nervous about that. And this congregation surrounded him in ways that were really helpful to me and to him as he made that decision, which was a decision that meant no federal or state aid to go to college. It was a big decision, and I felt like it wasn't understood in the wider world, but it was certainly, he was loved and embraced in this place.
I was moderator when the church split, and so I went through all of that, and that was a big change. I could see people being upset with what was going on, and most of the time I felt like it was the problem was relationship between the minister and these people not being willing to accept his position. There were certain leaders that were instrumental in it. Verne, one of my good friends, Bob Richards, I think all three of them ministers. And they're the ones that wanted to form a smaller group that was more family related, more like a home church. And so Bob had the old Methodist church that he was using for a film studio.
So they moved to Pomona, though, in the split?
Much later, after they, that's what the remnants of this fellowship, Church of the Brethren, joined with Pomona. And we lost a lot of hard-working members, no question about that, real leadership from the church board and the whole Sunday school teachers.
It was in the 60s. Harry K. Zeller was the preacher. And we were all for him. We liked him a lot. And we supported his work.
Harry was the best speaker I've ever heard. The most convincing, the most, everything about him from that aspect was just tremendous. But he was not a people person. He was an idea person.
We had a joy service because of it. We had a big event in the fellowship hall. It was the church's Sunday morning service, and we had a great big table with a flowered tablecloth, and at the corners we had the Eucharist, and you could come and dip your bread in the wine and have your bread and wine at the same time. And people sat on chairs, and at one place in the service they would turn their chair and talk to the people behind them. And it was a great event. We enjoyed it very much, and we put balloons in the air and said hallelujah.
The joy service was wonderful. It was in the fellowship hall, and there was a big table with a beautiful flowered tablecloth on it, and that became my bedspread at home, and beautiful paper flowers in all colors that women in the church had made. And it was just so much fun. We had helium balloons that we took outside, and at the time I think it just blew people's minds.
That ended up with some of the people just being so angry at us that they told us we didn't belong. And I went to the church board meeting, and when they were discussing it, and there was some that said no, that wasn't the direction we should go at all. And so Rodney and I talked about it, and we just decided if the church wanted to stay in its old place, we would go. We wouldn't keep ruffling their feathers and making them mad at us.
We saw family split, which was really, really heartbreaking. And but the thing that I think came out of it is people making a decision about what is important in their life and in the church activities. And it's enabled our church to move forward in a lot of issues that we probably would not have been able to move nearly as fast in.
About 1968 that happened. So we went to Rodney's next love, which was baseball, and started following the Sunday baseball teams. And we did that through the 70s and the 80s. And then Chuck Boyer was called to be the minister at the church. And Rodney had a great regard for Chuck. And so he started going back to the Sunday morning service. So the rest of us did too. And at the time, Riley was a baby, and we took her up in the balcony, and she was in a basket up there while we listened to the sermon. It was just a lot of fun to be back. And so we returned with our kids and the family.
That this church is the church I look for my whole life, where I know my own family is welcome, where I know I'm welcome, and because then I can truly say that to other people. I love that. And I feel like this is a church that believes, that's the wrong word. This is a church where we're doers of the word, where we practice our faith. Doing and serving and being are what matter to us most. I love that about this church.
It's all about love and inclusive, welcoming, beautiful people.
Another thing I love about this church is that the arts are important, that there are peace cranes flying from the halfway back in the sanctuary, that there are banners, that different people do the worship center and people come in and go, oh yes. Celebration of the arts. It's beauty matters, and beauty inspires, and beauty calls us, and it teaches us something, and I love that this church gets that.
Not all Brethren people were like the people in the Laverne Church of the Brethren.
I've really come to appreciate the edginess of our church. I think I first felt that edginess when I worked for a messenger in Elgin, Illinois, and when Chuck Boyer was moderator of the church, and he took a stand for inclusivity, and I watched how the church surrounded and stood for justice, and I think our church has grown ever since and become much more edgier in terms of inclusivity and openness, and all people are welcome. That's what I love about the church. That's the piece that resonates with me.
He was in favor of accepting gay and lesbians into our church.
I like the way our church has evolved and continues to evolve, and I think that's part of our mission, is to continue that involvement and to educate people.
We got more hate mail than you could ever imagine after we had moved out here and after he got that moderator job. And of all places, that annual conference that year was in Indianapolis, and that was the home state of Chuck Boyer, which was even more hurtful. He was thrilled to be a moderator in his own state, but his own state was very unaccepting of him at that annual conference.
Having a woman minister, it has been a change because there were a lot of churches that still don't want to have a woman minister, and here we have two women ministers, and nobody's making a big fuss about it, so it's
they don't dare.
Oh.
I love the pastors because I feel like they listen and that they're not afraid to share their raw emotion, which moves people.
There's a lot more women in leadership. There's a lot less volunteerism happening in the church. I would say, in terms of me personally, coming to this church allowed me to preach in a way that I hadn't felt like I could fully preach any other place in my life. Because this church helped me to authentically get into the pulpit and speak my stories and the call I felt, and so this church has changed me in that way.
There was a time when they didn't believe in having a piano in the church, and I remember as a child going to a council meeting, and one of the older men got up and said, I think we can have a piano. Then the Schrock family gave us an organ when the church was built, and music has been a very important part.
My first memory is the music. Being just sucked into it.
Women in ministry now versus then, and even the building of this church has changed. What do you see as far as changes for the next 125 years?
I think the church, the institutional church, whether it's this congregation or any congregation, is in flux. I think it's changing. I have no idea what it's changing to. I think church is going to look different 5 years from now, 25 years from now, much less 125 years from now. I think we just need to be open to the change.
How do you describe this church to people who don't know about it?
Open and affirming.
I just say we're a cool church. Like
loving.
Yeah.
Progressive. Non-conforming.
We continue to be an active peacemaking church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just what we stand for. It's
That's
something
true.
that we actually
That's
do.
true.
Like get more involved
in current events.
Non-passive pacifists.
I really like the diversity and the openness and welcoming to all people.
I really have thought that this church was the most right-on church of any church that I'd ever attended, as far as practicing what the gospel tells us to be doing. And so I think we're on the right track to still keep rooting for the underdog, and in this case I'm thinking of the homosexual people, transgender people. I really, really think that Laverne Church of the Brethren is one of the best churches around.
We've been a peace church, and our stance has been all war is sin, which is a very passive, to some degree, stance. And I'm not saying that members of our church have been passive. I mean, we've been active, certainly, in the peace movement. But I think justice is much more, right now, in terms of the way our society is functioning, much more of a verb. That we're talking about eco-injustice, economic injustice, social injustice, racial injustice. Is so many places where, because our society has separated between the haves and have-nots so much, that there is a whole faction of our society who have no concept of what justice feels like and have never seen it. And to function as a church, to live out our calling, I think it's becoming much more of our role to seek points of inputting justice and peace. And maybe they're synonymous, but maybe they're not. And to focus on justice with peace, or for justice in difference to peace, I think is something worth having a conversation about.
Quasquincentenial. I've practiced that repeatedly.
Here comes my son calling me now. Quasquincentenial. Can I tell him I'll call him Better erase that, okay? Don't get all this silly stuff in there.